Water courses through Poughkeepsie's history like nothing else. It has influenced our location, our name, our fortunes and misfortunes from the first days of human settlement thousands of years ago. We can suffer from its overabundance or suffer from its absence. We want neither flood nor drought, but an unnaturally consistent flow, on demand. In the hot summer, we want ice. In the Arctic winter, we want free-flowing water, especially when we need to extinguish fire. So essential, yet increasingly hidden, buried in culverts, forced into pipes, and walled in or over, we believe water deserves our better understanding and appreciation. To this end, we'll look at the water that naturally forms most of our combined city and town border. Then look at the springs and streams within those borders. And finally, we'll look at our man-made efforts to coax and cajole the water from its natural state to perform in an almost endless variety of ways. The enormous scale and strategic location of what we call the Hudson River and its valley explains why George Washington, during the Revolutionary War, said that the key to the entire North American continent was fixed within its path at West Point, and explains why so much of that war was oriented around it. Its connection to the Mohawk River, opening up access to the Great Lakes in the west, and its rich harbor as it connects with the Atlantic, provide an unparalleled 150-mile stretch of water that we're right in the middle of. In addition to scale and location, the Hudson is not a river, but a tidal estuary. It flows both ways with the rise and fall of the moon's gravitational pull, accelerating travel in two directions that was particularly helpful when we had only manpower and not steam or horsepower. The importance of the route was greatly amplified in 1825 with the opening of the Erie Canal that ran from Albany due west, at a time when a vast canal system was evolving. A few decades later, it was amplified again by a railroad that was built at the water's edge. As recently as a century ago, the Hudson regularly froze, and the railroad helped especially through those months, when the Hudson took on a different valuable role. It became the source of the ice that would be stored in ice houses to last through the summer. The frozen Hudson also allowed for a little sport. Poughkeepsie's east and southern border is created by the water of the Wappinger Creek, with the exception of about a mile where Wappinger's Falls grab the northern shoreline to more effectively run its mills, making Poughkeepsie's west, east, and south virtually entirely surrounded by water. But the visibility of the creek has receded. Compare the experience of crossing the Wappinger at LaGrange a century ago with today. It's easy to be completely unaware that this central county stream is just below. The watershed of the Wappinger Creek stretches over 25 miles and includes this natural spring, from the time of the earliest maps called Cold Spring, approaching the border of the northernmost town of Pine Plains. In the pre-contact period, what we call Wappinger Creek was the northernmost reach of the Wappinger, part of the Delaware people, a vast civilization reaching south through New York City to the Delaware River. To the north, the U-shaped Roloff-Jansenkill marked the southern reach of the Mohican, native people whose civilization extended north through Albany to Lake George and Lake Champlain. Roloff-Jansenkill became the orientation point for the settlement of Columbia County, while just south, the Wappinger Creek, along with the Fishkill, which empties at Beacon, became the orientation point for the settlement of Dutchess County. Of the many natural springs, one in particular is central to our identity. The general course of Route 9 was a Native American footpath between Manhattan and Albany and beyond. On this route, 4 miles south of the center of Poughkeepsie, is a spring used by Native people as a resting place at today's Spring Manor Apartments and Spring Manor Circle. The Native people's words to describe a reed-covered lodge by the little water place sounded to English ears through some variations along the way, like Poughkeepsie. In 1924, The acclaimed Dutchess County Historical Society duo of Helen Wilkinson Reynolds as researcher and author, and Margaret DeMott Brown as photographer, put forward a highly detailed expose on the topic. We've just begun a process to add diverse contemporary views and context to this landmark work of a century ago. It was 15 years after the publication of this book that the scene of the reed-covered lodge by the little water place became one of the 3 major murals in the upstairs gallery of the new Poughkeepsie post office. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt appointed Reynolds, who he said knew more about Dutchess County history than anyone else, as his personal historical advisor on the post office project. One of the most essential uses of these springs and small streams, the equivalent of dotting the landscape with gas stations today, was the omnipresent water trough. They had an obvious role for horses, for example, in the photo album of Poughkeepsie's Benjamin Fowler. He has a photo of his horse Harry getting some refreshment at Spackenkill. Fancier troughs and drinking fountains for people populated the city as well. Within Poughkeepsie's borders, 2 streams dominate, with Kasperskill being the longer. Just east of the resting place is a spring called Fonteskill. Fonten, the Dutch word for spring, is an important source for Kasperskill, and one of the reasons Matthew Vasser chose the location he did for the college bearing his name. Reynolds and DeMott Brown, in another work, an essay on the Vasser campus, led with a description of Fonteskill, given its centrality and impact, allowing 2 large lakes in particular, Vasser Lake and Sunset Lake. The mouth of the Kasperskill in the 18th century was graced with the home of New York Governor George Clinton. This early 19th century depiction of his home when he was Vice President of the United States under Thomas Jefferson and then James Madison was published in the 1926 Dutchess County Historical Society yearbook. Despite its proximity to so much water, the house was completely destroyed by fire in 1876. These photographs were taken shortly after. By the 1880s, the extraction of lime for the iron furnaces at Poughkeepsie and the endless need for crushed stone for railroad beds saw the mouth of the Kasperskill become the site of the largest stone crushing operation in the United States at the time. Documented by Poughkeepsie waterfront artist Eunice Hatfield Smith a half-century ago as a kind of local landmark and active today, one passes literally through and among the work on the railroad approach to Poughkeepsie Station. Of all the streams, it was the Fallkill that saw the largest and most persistent industrial growth, creating the central focus of the city. This is a view of the mouth of the Fallkill at the Hudson River, what we today call Upper Landing, in 1788. We know there was a mill in this location by 1699. The mill's clearly powered directly by water through a water wheel. These early direct water-powered mills required the building of dams and mill ponds to ensure a consistency of flow over the water wheel month to month. These mill ponds, just east of the mouth of the Fallkill, grew in size right in the center of town, as did the massive Red Mill Pond at the intersection of Clinton, Smith, and Mill Streets. However, the invention of steam power by the 1870s allowed their reclamation to accommodate Poughkeepsie's growing population and need for homes. The location of the first reservoir in 1835, still called Reservoir Square at the intersection of Clinton and Cannon Streets, had water pumped up from that nearby Red Mill Pond. It was used exclusively for extinguishing fires through distributed hydrants, not for drinking water. The 4 holding walls were designed such that you could ascend a central stair and enjoy a promenade at the top, with wonderful views for public enjoyment, albeit with some limitation. A law published at its opening called for a $10 penalty for anyone damaging the reservoir or for anyone who would, quote, publicly expose themselves or bathe naked. Despite all the effort put into the construction of the firefighting reservoir and fire hydrants, Poughkeepsie suffered a great number of significant fires that did considerable damage. Among the more spectacular was the January 18th, 1857 fire that destroyed the Dutch Church on Main and Washington Streets. Starting to extinguish the fire midday, the temperature dropped from 13 below zero to 20 below zero, during the fruitless effort to save the church. Early firefighting apparatus, such as this one from Phoenix Hose, was pulled by men. It obviously lacked the heft and grit of later equipment, but looked great in a parade. Artists could romantically depict the coexistence of the natural beauty of the Hudson Valley at Poughkeepsie and industry. But in truth, high-impact, dirty, noisy operations, combined with deep cuts for the railroad, started to stain Poughkeepsie's reputation, culminating in this 1912 political cartoon, a time when growing public awareness helped start a movement to clean up the waterfront. In addition, the lack of distinct drinking and wastewater systems meant that Poughkeepsie gained an outsized reputation for deadly waterborne diseases. Poughkeepsie's leading 19th century businessman and philanthropist, Matthew Vasser, had all the direct experience one could have, seeing the stark and deadly difference between good and poor water management. Understanding the need to promote a product that is fresh and pure, the story of Vasser's brewery goes back to 1803, when Matthew's father, James, opened what would become the titanic three-generation family business right at a natural spring at what is today Vasser Street. The business quickly expanded to include buildings right up to the waterfront. Despite this proximity to a spring and the Hudson River, the original brewery building was completely destroyed by fire in April of 1811. The fire led to the death of Matthew Vasser's brother, John Guy Vasser, who left 2 infant boys to be raised by their mother. Just over 20 years later, in July 1832, on the same newspaper page announcing that Matthew Vasser would bring the 2 fatherless nephews, now adults, into the brewery business, it was announced that a ship carrying lumber to the Vasser brewery had a case of the deadly contagious cholera, a disease accelerated by drinking water contaminated by wastewater. But villagers were assured the case was isolated and all was well. Within a month, on a percentage of population basis adjusted for today, the equivalent of 1,500 people died in a matter of weeks, and a scathing denunciation of those areas of the village declared as most filthy was pronounced. It's not surprising, then, that Matthew Vasser was on the committee that created the 1835 reservoir, and that he volunteered to head up the 1853 Poughkeepsie Aqueduct and Hydraulic Company, which would for the first time address clean drinking water and not just fire protection. But nothing was accomplished when the Civil War and death of Matthew Vasser put an end to the company. Ultimately and finally, folks turned to College Hill. In 1872, a central role for water management was created at this city high point that remains and continues to grow to this day. Emerging as a prominent, publicly accessible space, with the 1836 construction and opening of the prestigious Collegiate School, a school that counted Franklin Roosevelt's father James among its earliest students, it was built in the unmistakable and popular Greek Revival style, imitating not only the Acropolis in form, but in its hilltop location, albeit a smaller hilltop. The public came to enjoy its walks and gardens and its views in all directions, especially after 1892, when College Hill became city property. The public was invited to hear concerts or have a picnic on the 4th of July with fireworks, or take a leisurely Sunday drive, as you can see in the photo album of LaGrange artist Carolyn Morgan Clowes. One of its most popular public spaces was College Grove, located between the western hillside and North Clinton Street. It's very visible and well preserved today. It was on this spot that thousands of people assembled on August 2nd, 1858, to celebrate Emancipation Day, the anniversary of the British ending slavery in 1834, a practice still active at the time in the southern United States, of course. Former slave and black author, speaker, and thought leader Frederick Douglass gave an electrifying talk for 2 hours. College Hill's other important role, one that very much remains to this day, is water management. Launched in 1872 with the creation of the first reservoir to provide water that is safe for drinking, as well as water to extinguish fires, it was designed to be a scenic feature of the larger park. By contrast, intentionally out of sight in North Poughkeepsie, At the edge of the Hudson River, where water has been sourced since 1872, you'll find today's Poughkeepsie Water Treatment Facility, pointing out that the 1872 infrastructure created the first sand filtration system in the United States, which then quickly became the standard everywhere. The original pumping station allowed for 2 stages. In the first stage, water was pumped to sand filtration beds. At first uncovered, in 1905, these dramatic underground sand filtration beds were built. Here, impurities fell into the sand, which would be cleaned out over time, eventually allowing for a second stage, the pumping of clear water to be stored at the College Hill Reservoir. The construction of sewer and drain pipes was begun at this time, using a kind of protected workshop on tracks that was moved along to install the pipes. This is how it looked along Main Street at the time. How tragically ironic that the school building was completely destroyed by fire in 3 hours in February of 1917, standing 1,000 feet away but uphill from the reservoir. 0-degree temperatures and persistent winds from the north and east made its defense impossible. In 1922, under the leadership of the Superintendent of Public Works, Thomas F. Lawler, voters approved, but by only 16 votes, the expenditure of what today would be $8 million, allowing new water and sewer mains and the construction of an underground reservoir. These are scenes of the 1923 excavation, the pouring of concrete to create vaulted ceilings, and the construction of the underground reservoir that remains in use today. The 1930s, despite a global economic depression, saw the creation and opening of the Dudley Memorial Shelter, named for Guilford Dudley, who left the money for its construction, and the opening of a municipal golf course. Both the shelter and golf course are active today. A glimpse of water tanks shows more recent developments in water management, which continue to expand. College Hill maintains a dual role of a public place with views, gardens, and walks, and the less visible but essential role of water management. Water is so vital, perpetual, and enduring. But the fact that it is so dynamic and variable sometimes works to our advantage and sometimes doesn't. Too much water can be as bad as too little. Its variable forms of water, ice, and steam can work for us or against us. We feel we should come to know the power of its presence and the power of its absence by understanding its history. We hope we've gone some way to begin to do so.